The scream tore through the house, just as the plate shattered on the marble floor. Everyone froze. The maid stood in the doorway, one hand still on the door handle, the other clutching a small brown bag. Her outfit was wrong for this house, too bold, too revealing, too loud for a place built on quiet respect. The thin fabric hugged her in a way that made the air heavy, uncomfortable. Time seemed to slow as every eye turned toward her. Pastor Elijah Moore dropped the glass he had been holding. It slipped from his fingers as if his strength had suddenly left him. His wife, Ruth Moore, staggered back a step, her hand flying to her chest. Their teenage son, Marcus, stared openly, confusion written all over his face. The younger daughter, Nia, sensed something bad and hid behind the dining chair. But the real shock was not the outfit. It was Pastor Elijah's face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His eyes widened, not with desire, not with anger, but with recognition. Deep, terrifying recognition. The maid lifted her chin slowly, her gaze locking onto his. Her eyes were steady, unafraid, almost accusing. "So," she said softly, her voice calm but sharp like a blade, "you still live like nothing ever happened." Ruth turned to her husband. "Elijah, what is she talking about?" He didn't answer. The maid took one step into the room. The sound of her shoes echoed like a drumbeat. "You didn't think I would ever find you," she continued. "But here I am." Silence swallowed the house. Outside, the evening call to prayer drifted faintly from a nearby mosque, mixing with the distant hum of traffic. Life continued as usual beyond those walls. Inside, everything was breaking apart. "Who are you?" Ruth asked, her voice trembling. The maid smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You hired me. You should know my name." Pastor Elijah finally found his voice. "You need to leave, now." She laughed quietly. "After all these years, after what you did." Ruth looked from the maid to her husband, her heart pounding. "Elijah, tell me what is going on." He shook his head slowly, sweat forming at his temples. "Ruth, please, take the children upstairs." Marcus didn't move. "Dad, why does she sound like she knows you?" The maid reached into her bag. Ruth screamed. "Don't," Pastor Elijah whispered, stepping forward. "Please." The maid's fingers closed around something inside the bag, but she didn't pull it out yet. She tilted her head slightly, studying the family, this perfect picture of success, faith, and respect. "You built all this," she said. "A beautiful home, a good name, a family that trusts you." Her eyes burned into his. "And you buried the truth." The bag slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Something slid out. Ruth gasped as she recognized it. A faded photograph, old and creased, showing a much younger Elijah standing beside a woman who looked almost exactly like the maid, except older, tired, and broken. The maid's voice dropped to a whisper. "That woman was my mother." The room spun. Ruth felt her knees weaken. "Elijah, tell me this is not what it looks like." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the front door creaked again. A knock echoed through the house. Everyone turned. The maid smiled slowly. "Looks like the past isn't done knocking yet." And just like that, everything the Moore family had built stood on the edge of destruction. The knock came again, louder this time. Pastor Elijah knew, in that moment, that whatever waited on the other side of that door would change their lives forever. The knock at the door did not stop. It came again, slow and deliberate, as if whoever stood outside knew exactly what was happening inside the house. Pastor Elijah stared at the door like it might burst open on its own. Ruth held onto the edge of the dining table to steady herself, her eyes fixed on the photograph lying on the floor. The maid bent down and picked it up gently, brushing dust off the surface as though it were fragile. "Relax," she said calmly. "It's not the police, not yet." That word landed heavily in the room. Elijah swallowed hard. "Keisha, please, you promised." Keisha, the name echoed through Ruth's mind. "So you do remember her," Ruth said slowly. "You remember her name." Keisha turned to Ruth, studying her face carefully. "I didn't want to come like this. I really didn't. But when people hide the truth for too long, the truth finds its own way out. Marcus stepped closer to his mother. "Dad, who is she?" Before Elijah could answer, Keisha walked past them and opened the front door. Standing outside was an elderly woman holding a tray of food. Mrs. Johnson, the next-door neighbor, peered inside with concern. "I heard shouting," she said. "Everything all right?" Keisha smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am, just family matters." Mrs. Johnson's eyes moved around the room, taking in the broken plate, the tense faces, the photograph still in Keisha's hand. "Well," she said slowly, "if you need anything." "We're fine," Ruth said quickly. "Thank you." The door closed. The house exhaled, but the tension remained. Keisha turned back to Elijah. "You see, still protecting your image." Ruth crossed her arms, her voice firmer now. "You will explain, both of you, right now." Elijah sank into a chair like a man carrying a weight he could no longer hold. "Her mother's name was Deborah," he began quietly. "This was before I became who I am now, before the church, before you." Ruth's heart pounded. "What happened to her?" Keisha answered for him. "He promised her a future, then he disappeared when things got hard." Elijah shook his head. "That's not the whole truth." "Isn't it?" Keisha snapped. "You knew she was pregnant, you knew." Marcus's eyes widened. "Pregnant?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Ruth felt dizzy. "Elijah, tell me you didn't." He looked up at her, tears forming. "I was young. I was afraid. I chose my calling over my responsibility." Keisha laughed bitterly. "Your calling fed you. My mother died poor." Nia began to cry softly. Ruth pulled her close. "How did you find us?" she asked Keisha. Keisha's voice softened for the first time. "I didn't plan to. I was hired through an agency. When I saw the address, when I saw his name, I thought it was a mistake." She paused. Then I saw his face. Elijah rubbed his temples. "Why the outfit?" he asked quietly. Keisha looked down at herself. "Because I wanted you to feel uncomfortable. I wanted you to feel exposed, the way my mother was." Ruth closed her eyes. She finally understood. The outfit wasn't about temptation. It was about confrontation. Keisha continued, "My mother wore clothes like this when she cleaned houses. People judged her. They said she had no morals, but she worked hard. She raised me alone." Ruth opened her eyes. "Why now?" Keisha's jaw tightened. "Because I'm tired of watching men walk away from their past and still be called good." Elijah stood up suddenly. "I will make this right." Keisha met his gaze. "You already chose not to." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded envelope, placing it on the table. "Tomorrow night, the church board meets. Everything you buried is in there." Ruth stared at the envelope, her world tilting. "You're going to destroy him." Keisha shook her head slowly. "The truth will." She turned toward the hallway. "I'll finish my duties for today. Dinner will be ready in an hour." As she walked away, Ruth realized something terrifying. This wasn't revenge. This was justice taking its time. And the family had just stepped into its path. Before the chapter closes, take a moment to pause with this story. If you're watching right now, comment where you're watching from. And if this story has pulled you in so far, remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who enjoys powerful stories. What would you have done if you were Ruth in this moment? Have you ever seen something like this happen? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this story is only just beginning. The smell of stew filled the house, but no one felt hungry. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed upstairs, staring at the wall. Marcus leaned against the window, watching the street below as if answers might walk past. Nia had cried herself to sleep, exhausted by confusion she was too young to name. Downstairs, Pastor Elijah sat alone in the living room. The envelope Keisha had placed on the table lay untouched, like a sleeping snake. Every sound in the house felt louder than it should have been. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Keisha moved calmly as she cooked. Her hands did not shake. Her face showed no anger now, only focus. Anyone watching her would think she had worked in that house for years, not hours. Elijah finally stood and walked toward the kitchen. He stopped at the doorway. "You didn't have to stay," he said quietly. Keisha didn't turn. "Neither did you." "All those years ago." Silence followed. "I prayed every day for forgiveness," Elijah said. "I asked God to cover my mistakes." Keisha stirred the pot slowly. "God covers repentance, not hiding." Elijah's shoulders slumped. "What do you want from me?" She turned then, her eyes sharp. "I want you to stop pretending." Upstairs, Ruth rose from the bed and walked toward the stairs. She paused halfway down, listening. Keisha continued, "My mother waited for you. She believed every letter you wrote. When they stopped coming, she still defended you. She said you were called by God." Elijah's voice cracked. "I was wrong." Keisha nodded. "Yes, and wrong choices have long shadows." She lowered the heat and wiped her hands. "Dinner is ready." They ate in silence. Ruth forced herself to swallow a few bites, her mind racing. She studied Keisha carefully. There was pain there, yes, but also control. This was not a woman acting on impulse. This was someone who had planned her steps carefully. After dinner, Keisha cleared the table and washed the dishes. Ruth joined her, unable to stay away any longer. "Did my husband know about you?" Ruth asked. Keisha shook her head. "No, I didn't exist to him." Ruth swallowed. "And now?" Keisha met her eyes. "Now I exist." Ruth felt something twist in her chest. "You could have come to us differently." "I tried," Keisha replied softly. "But people who are comfortable don't hear whispers. They only hear noise." Later that night, as the house grew quiet, Elijah sat alone again. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You have until tomorrow afternoon." His heart pounded. Upstairs, Ruth lay awake beside him, her back turned. She didn't know whether to scream, cry, or pray. She only knew that the man beside her felt like a stranger. In the small maid's room at the back of the house, Keisha sat on her bed and opened her own phone. She scrolled through old photos, her mother smiling weakly, hospital rooms, unpaid bills, eviction notices. She typed a message. "It's happening." She lay back and stared at the ceiling, remembering her mother's voice. "Don't hate him, Keisha. Just make sure the truth doesn't die with me." Outside, the wind rattled the windows. None of them knew that by morning, the secret would no longer belong to that house alone. And someone else was already watching. Morning came quietly, almost politely, as if the house had not spent the night holding its breath. Ruth was the first to wake. She lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of the neighborhood, footsteps, distant engines, a radio playing softly somewhere down the street. For a moment, she hoped everything from the night before had been a bad dream. Then she remembered the photograph, the envelope, the look in Keisha's eyes. She sat up. Pastor Elijah was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He looked smaller than he used to, like a man whose title no longer fit him. "Are you going to open it?" Ruth asked quietly. He knew what she meant. "The envelope," she said. "You can't keep staring at it forever." Elijah nodded but didn't move. "Once I open it, there's no closing it again." Ruth's voice was calm, but firm. It was open the moment she walked into this house. Downstairs, Keisha was already dressed, this time in plain clothes. Jeans, a loose shirt, her hair pulled back. If someone saw her now, they would never guess how much chaos she carried with her. She poured herself a cup of water and looked around the kitchen. The house was beautiful, clean, loved. It was everything her mother had dreamed of but never touched. Marcus came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He froze when he saw Keisha. "Good morning," she said gently. He hesitated, then nodded. "Morning." There was an awkward pause. "Is it true," Marcus asked suddenly, "what you said about my dad?" Keisha didn't answer right away. She chose her words carefully. "Your father made choices before he became who you know. Those choices hurt people." Marcus swallowed. "Does that make him a bad man?" Keisha studied him. "That depends on what he does next." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Ruth and Elijah joined them in the kitchen. No one smiled. No one greeted anyone. Elijah walked to the table and finally picked up the envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were copies of old letters, his handwriting. Promises, excuses. There were hospital bills with Deborah's name on them, a birth certificate, Keisha's birth certificate. And one more thing. A printed email addressed to the church board. Ruth read it over his shoulder, her breath caught. You wrote to them already. Keisha nodded. I scheduled it to send this evening. Elijah's voice dropped. You said tomorrow night. I changed my mind, she replied calmly. People often do when they realize how quickly lies protect themselves. Ruth felt anger rise in her chest. You're taking away his chance to explain. Keisha met her gaze. He's had over 20 years. At that moment, Elijah's phone rang. He looked at the screen and went pale. It's Deacon Harris. The church. He answered slowly. Good morning. Ruth watched his face tighten as he listened. His eyes flicked to Keisha, then away. Yes, he said quietly. I understand. When he hung up, the silence was unbearable. They received something, he said. An anonymous message, not everything, just enough to ask questions. Ruth sat down heavily. So it's already started. Keisha nodded. I told you, the truth doesn't wait. Marcus looked between them all, his voice shaking. What happens to us? No one answered him. Outside, a car slowed down in front of the house. Then another. Curtains across the street shifted. Whispers were beginning, even if no one knew why yet. Ruth stood up straight. You will not tear this family apart and walk away, she said to Keisha. If this truth comes out, you stay and face it with us. Keisha hesitated. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed her face. I didn't come to destroy your children, she said softly. I came to honor my mother. Elijah finally spoke, his voice broken. Then let me do the right thing, publicly. Keisha searched his face, as if trying to decide whether the man standing before her was capable of truth at last. Her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. Her expression changed. What is it? Ruth asked. Keisha exhaled slowly. Someone else knows, someone who knew my mother too. Elijah felt his heart drop. Who? Keisha looked up, her eyes dark. Someone who doesn't believe in forgiveness at all. The doorbell rang. Once. Twice. Keisha slipped her phone into her pocket. That, she said quietly, might be them. And before anyone could stop her, she walked toward the door. Before the next chapter unfolds, take a moment. If this story is gripping you, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Like the video and share it with someone who enjoys powerful, emotional stories. What would you have done if you were Elijah or Ruth right now? Have you ever seen a secret threaten to destroy an entire family? Share your thoughts in the comments. Keisha's hand hovered over the door handle for a moment longer than necessary. Ruth noticed it. That brief pause said more than any words could. Whatever waited outside was not part of Keisha's careful plan. It was something older, heavier. Keisha opened the door. A tall man stood on the porch, his face lined by years of hard living. His hair was peppered with gray, his eyes sharp and restless. He wore a plain jacket and held a folded newspaper under his arm. Keisha, he said, you took your time. Her shoulders stiffened. Uncle Samuel. Ruth felt a chill. Uncle. Samuel stepped inside without being invited. His eyes swept across the room, landing on Elijah last. He smiled, but there was no kindness in it. So this is him, Samuel said, the great man of God. Elijah felt exposed under that stare. Sir, I. Samuel raised a hand. Save it. I've heard your kind speak before. Keisha closed the door behind him. You shouldn't have come. Samuel turned to her sharply. Your mother was my sister. I buried her. I paid her debts. I watched you grow up asking questions no one would answer. Ruth's heart pounded. What do you want? Samuel looked at her then, his gaze softer for a moment. I want what was stolen. Elijah shook his head. I'm willing to confess, to face the consequences. Samuel laughed. Consequences? You'll step down, write a letter, cry in front of your church. And then what? You'll be forgiven. He stepped closer. My sister never got forgiveness. She got sickness and silence. Keisha's voice was firm. That's not why I came. Samuel turned on her. Then why did you dress like that on your first day? Why did you want to shake them? Keisha flinched. Because I wanted him to feel shame. And now, Samuel asked, do you feel better? She didn't answer. Marcus watched everything from the stairs, unseen. His chest hurt. The man he admired, the house he felt safe in, the world he understood, everything was cracking. Samuel pulled the newspaper from under his arm and placed it on the table. Folded open, it showed a headline about a local charity scandal. Names, photos, ruined reputations. I have friends, Samuel said. People who make stories spread fast. Elijah felt his stomach drop. You already sent something. Samuel shrugged. Just a seed. Ruth's voice shook with anger. You're enjoying this. Samuel met her gaze. No, I'm finishing it. Keisha stepped between them. Stop, this isn't what my mother wanted. Samuel's eyes hardened. You didn't hear her last words. Keisha froze. What? She asked about him, Samuel said, nodding toward Elijah. Even at the end, she wondered if he ever thought about you. Keisha's eyes filled with tears she had held back for years. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because pain needs direction, Samuel replied, and now it has one. Ruth stepped closer to Keisha. You're not alone in this, she said quietly, but destroying everything won't heal what was broken. Keisha looked at her, torn. For the first time, she saw not an enemy, but another woman carrying disappointment. Outside, a car slowed again. A phone buzzed. Another message arrived somewhere in the room. Marcus descended the stairs. Dad, he said, his voice unsteady. Whatever you did, don't hide anymore. Elijah felt something inside him break open. I won't. Samuel smirked. Too late. Keisha wiped her face and straightened. No, she said firmly. It's not. She turned to Elijah. You will tell the truth today, on your own terms, not his. Samuel stared at her. You'd protect him. I'm protecting the truth, Keisha replied. Not your anger. Samuel's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Maybe, she said, but it will be mine. The house fell silent again. In that quiet, Ruth realized something terrifying and hopeful at the same time. The secret had escaped the house. What mattered now was who controlled its ending. And outside, the world was already listening. By late afternoon, the tension in the Moore household was almost unbearable. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken truths, accusations, and fear. Even the walls seemed to lean in, listening. Elijah paced the living room, glancing repeatedly at the envelope on the table. He knew what Keisha had planned for the church board that evening. If they opened it, there would be no turning back. His reputation, his calling, everything he had built could unravel in minutes. Ruth sat on the sofa, silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had tried to process the revelation about Keisha and her mother, the letters, the hospital bills, and now Samuel's unexpected arrival. But every time she tried to think clearly, she felt like she was walking through fog. Keisha sat calmly at the kitchen table, folding clothes as if nothing were happening. Her movements were deliberate, almost meditative. You don't have much time, she said softly, not looking up. The board meets at 7. After that, they'll decide what the public sees. Elijah stopped packing. And you, what are you going to do? I'm staying, she replied. I'm not leaving until this family and you face the truth fully. Then, and only then, will I leave. The sound of tires on the driveway drew their attention. 2 black SUVs slowed and parked outside. Elijah froze. Ruth grabbed his arm. Marcus and Nia peeked from the stairs, eyes wide. Samuel rose. They've arrived. Elijah swallowed hard. Who? People who know things. People who were wronged by lies, promises, and silence, Samuel said, his voice calm but dangerous. They're here to ensure nothing is hidden. The front doorbell rang. Once, twice. Ruth's hands shook as she reached for it. She opened the door slightly, peeking out. Outside stood 3 strangers, serious, composed, carrying folders and cameras, clearly not casual visitors. Keisha stood behind her, calm. "It begins," she whispered. Elijah took a deep breath. I have to go speak to them." "Stay where you are," Samuel said sharply. "They are not here for you to explain yet. They are here to gather evidence, to see the truth firsthand." Marcus stepped forward. "Dad, whatever you do, don't lie." Elijah nodded, swallowing his fear. "I won't." Ruth felt her throat tighten. "Keisha, why are you letting this happen like this? You could just leave and—" "No," Keisha interrupted gently. "I'm staying because the truth doesn't leave when it's convenient. It stays until it's heard, until it's felt, until it changes things." The strangers moved inside slowly, their presence heavy. They didn't speak. They didn't smile. Cameras clicked quietly. Every glance seemed to probe, measure, weigh. Samuel's eyes were cold. "Do not make a sound unless spoken to," he said. "Nothing leaves this house until the story is told right." Elijah sat on the sofa, sweating. Ruth placed a hand over his. He looked at her, fear and shame mixed with resolve in his eyes. Keisha stood in the middle of the living room, silent and still, watching everything unfold. Her gaze flicked to the photograph of her mother on the table. Then she looked at Elijah. "Do you remember her?" she asked. Elijah swallowed. I remember." She stepped closer. "Remember the promises you made. Remember the letters you wrote. Remember the life you could have protected. Remember the truth." Suddenly, one of the strangers pulled out a folder and approached the table, revealing documents Elijah didn't even recognize. Ruth gasped. Among them were receipts, letters, and photographs she hadn't seen before. Evidence she had no idea existed. Keisha watched, her expression unreadable. "Do you see now? It isn't just your past, it's everyone's future." Elijah felt a crushing weight settle on him. This was more than exposure, it was accountability. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The house felt smaller, constricted, like it couldn't contain the secrets anymore. One of the strangers looked directly at Keisha. "You set this up." She nodded slowly. "I only opened the door, they did the rest." Ruth took a deep breath. "This isn't just about Dad. This could destroy everything, our family, the church, our life here." Keisha's voice was steady. "Sometimes destruction is the only path to truth." Elijah looked down at his hands, shaking. "I don't know if I can survive this." Keisha's eyes softened, just for a moment. "You won't have to survive alone, but you will have to face what you've hidden." A sudden knock at the door made everyone jump. It was slow, deliberate. Not one of the strangers, someone else. Keisha's jaw tightened. "They're coming, the ones who never forgive." The chapter closes with Elijah frozen in fear, Ruth clutching Marcus and Nia, and Keisha standing like a sentinel between the family and the unknown force outside. Pause for a moment, viewers. If this story has gripped you so far, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Like the video, share it with someone who loves suspenseful stories, and comment below. What would you do if strangers showed up at your door demanding the truth about your family? Have you ever seen a secret threaten to destroy an entire home? Let us know. If you want, I can continue immediately with Chapter 7, where the tension escalates even further with the arrival of this mysterious, unforgiving force. Do you want me to continue? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent, echoing through the hallways of the Moore house. Elijah froze in place, his fingers tightening around the armrest of the sofa. Ruth instinctively pulled Marcus and Nia close, her heart hammering like a drum in her chest. Keisha stepped forward, her presence calm but commanding. She placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Do not open it," she said softly. "Not yet. Let them speak first." The door creaked as Samuel slowly reached for the handle, pausing before pulling it open. Standing there were 3 men, dressed sharply but with an unmistakable air of authority. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold, and each of them carried a clipboard. They didn't smile, didn't greet, didn't move as if they belonged to the household. They moved like predators assessing prey. One of the men spoke, his voice low and measured. "Pastor Elijah Moore, we are here regarding allegations connected to your personal and professional history. We need full access to documents, communications, and any evidence of involvement with Deborah Lawson." Elijah's throat went dry. He could feel Ruth's hand shaking in his grip. I don't understand," he stammered. This is private." Keisha cut in, her voice steady and sharp. "You'll do exactly as they say. The truth isn't private, it's overdue." Ruth's gaze flicked from Keisha to the strangers. "Overdue? What truth? Who sent you?" The man with the clipboard didn't answer. Instead, he stepped inside, surveying the living room with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. He began snapping photos of the envelope on the table, the photograph of Deborah, and even Elijah himself, as if capturing guilt in its purest form. Marcus couldn't hold back. "Dad, just tell them everything." Elijah shook his head. "It's not that simple." The second man opened a laptop, typing rapidly. "We have received information that suggests concealment of financial and personal correspondence regarding Deborah Lawson and her daughter. The details must be verified immediately." Keisha turned to Elijah. "Do you understand what's happening? They're not here to negotiate, they're here to collect evidence. And if you lie, it will get worse." Elijah swallowed. "I'll cooperate." The third man, taller than the others, stepped closer to the table. He examined the envelope carefully and then looked at Keisha. "You delivered these documents." Keisha nodded. "I did. The rest is theirs to see." Outside, a car engine roared to life. The house vibrated slightly with its presence. Everyone froze. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "They've brought reinforcements," he said, his voice cold. "People who never forgive, who never forget." Ruth clutched Marcus and Nia. "What does that mean?" "It means," Keisha said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that what happens tonight will decide if this family survives, or if it becomes a warning to others." Elijah felt his knees weaken. The weight of decades of lies, promises broken, and choices abandoned pressed down on him like a physical force. He looked at Keisha. Why are you doing this? You could just walk away." "I could," she said, "but my mother didn't have that luxury. I can't take it from her now." The strangers spread out through the living room, examining files, typing, photographing, and questioning. Samuel observed from a corner, his presence a reminder that the past would not be ignored. Keisha moved toward the envelope and opened it in front of the strangers. Letters, receipts, photographs, and personal documents spilled onto the table. Every page told a story of abandonment, betrayal, and the consequences of choices left unchecked. Elijah felt exposed, stripped bare in a way that no sermon, no prayer, no public act could ever repair. Outside, the second SUV doors opened. Another figure emerged, tall and deliberate, moving with quiet authority toward the front porch. Keisha's eyes widened slightly. "That's them," she said. "The ones who will not forgive at all." Ruth's heart raced. "Who are they?" Keisha didn't answer. She only stepped slightly in front of Elijah, as if preparing to shield him from whatever was about to enter. The figure reached the doorstep and paused, pulling a hood back to reveal a face so familiar and terrifying that even Samuel stepped back slightly. Keisha's voice dropped to a whisper, shaking only slightly. "It's someone from my mother's past, someone she feared more than anyone." The door creaked open fully. The figure stepped inside. Everyone froze. And in that moment, Elijah realized that the secret he thought was buried had come back with a vengeance, and nothing would ever be the same again. Before we move to the next chapter, pause for a moment. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now, like this video, and share it with someone who loves suspense. Comment below. What would you do if someone from your family's past suddenly appeared demanding justice? How far would you go to protect your family's secrets? Do you want me to continue now with Chapter 8, where the arrival of this terrifying figure brings the story to its climax? The figure stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, with a gaze that seemed to cut through every wall, every secret, every lie in the Moore house. The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses on your chest, makes it hard to breathe. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed loud in that moment. Keisha's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice steady but tight. The man or woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I've been waiting a long time," they said, voice low and deliberate. "For 20 years, watching, listening, waiting for this moment." Ruth felt a chill run down her spine. Who are you?" The figure's eyes flicked to the photograph of Deborah on the table. "I am someone who saw her suffer, someone who knew every wrong that was done to her, and I came to make sure it doesn't happen again." Elijah stepped forward, shaking. You can't. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," the figure interrupted. "I understand the lies, the promises, the absence, and the excuses." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Watch yourself," he said. "You're not the one to pass judgment here." The figure turned to Keisha, their expression unreadable. "You brought me here," they said. "You've invited me into his life, into the life of everyone he claims to love." Keisha nodded. "I did, because the truth cannot wait, because my mother deserves that justice even if she's gone." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. The strangers from before shifted, uncertain now, their authority challenged by this new presence. Ruth gripped Elijah's arm. "Please," she whispered, "don't let this destroy everything we've built. You can make this right." Elijah looked at the figure, then at the envelope, then at Keisha. I will tell the truth," he said, his voice trembling. "Everything, all of it." The figure studied him silently, as if measuring the weight of his words. Finally, they nodded. "Good, that is the first step." Keisha's shoulders relaxed slightly. "It's not easy," she said softly, "but it has to be done." The figure stepped closer to the table and spread the documents out. "Everything here," they said, pointing at the letters, receipts, photographs, and emails, "is evidence, proof of what happened, proof that he cannot run from his past." Elijah swallowed hard, feeling the crushing weight of every decision he had ever made. I am sorry," he whispered. "To Deborah, to Keisha, to all of you, I failed her. I failed my family. I failed myself." Keisha's eyes glimmered with a mix of anger and sorrow. "It's not enough," she said, "but it's a start." The figure turned to Ruth. "And you've lived in the shadow of someone else's secrets. You deserve to see the truth before it's too late." Ruth nodded slowly, tears running down her face. "I want to understand. I want to know everything." Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension. "Dad, it's time to face it. No more hiding." Elijah took a deep breath and began recounting everything. The letters to Deborah, the promises he broke, the fear that drove him away. Every lie he had ever told, every secret he had buried, spilled into the room like a river long dammed. As he spoke, the house seemed to breathe, listening. The strangers took notes, the figure observed, Keisha stayed silent, and Ruth held Marcus and Nia close. When he finally finished, the silence returned, but this time it felt different. Heavy, yes, but also charged, as if the truth had finally set something in motion. The figure nodded. "This is only the beginning," they said. "The church board will see, the community will know, and he will have to face the consequences." Keisha turned to Elijah. "You still have a choice," she said quietly. "Face it with courage or run again." Elijah nodded. "I will face it." The figure stepped back toward the door, their presence commanding even in departure. "Remember, the past is never gone. It waits, and it always finds a way back." As the door closed behind them, the tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it deepened. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the Moore house. Keisha finally picked up the envelope, straightening the papers with careful hands. "Tomorrow," she said, "the world will see everything." Ruth looked at her, uncertain. "What will happen to us?" Keisha's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "The world may judge, but truth never destroys. It only reveals what was already there." Elijah sank into a chair, exhausted but resolute. He had faced the reckoning, and now there was no turning back. And outside, the quiet hum of the street masked the storm that was coming. A storm built on secrets, revenge, and justice long overdue. Pause for a moment, viewers. If this story has you captivated, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with friends. Comment below. What would you do if the past came knocking on your door like this? Could you face your own secrets, or would you run? Your thoughts could be part of the discussion as we move toward the conclusion. Do you want me to continue with Chapter 9, the dramatic conclusion where all the secrets and consequences collide? Chapter 9. The next morning, the Moore house felt different. The air was thick with expectation, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, neighbors glanced at the home curiously. Word of strangers arriving and the tense atmosphere had begun to travel, though no one knew exactly why. Elijah sat at the dining table, the envelope of documents before him. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the papers, the weight of his choices pressing down like a storm. Ruth stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. Marcus and Nia watched quietly from the side, too young to understand everything, but old enough to sense that something monumental was unfolding. Keisha moved through the kitchen with deliberate calm. She didn't speak, didn't hurry, she only waited. Her presence was a reminder that the truth would not be ignored and that the family had to face the consequences together. The church board meeting was scheduled for noon. The strangers who had come the night before were outside now, cameras ready, notebooks open. Every second that ticked by carried the weight of exposure, and the Moores felt as though the walls themselves were shrinking around them. Elijah exhaled slowly, finally gathering courage. "It's time," he said. "I will not hide any longer. The letters, the promises, the mistakes, they all need to be seen." Ruth nodded, her eyes glistening. "We will face it together," she said, "as a family." Keisha placed a hand lightly on the envelope. "Then, let's make sure the truth is clear and nothing is left to misinterpret." Elijah carried the documents carefully, walking to the car that would take him to the church. Keisha followed silently, Samuel at her side, watching every move. Outside, the world was beginning to awaken to the story that had been hidden for decades. At the church, the board waited. Their expressions were polite but wary, their pens poised. Elijah laid the envelope on the table and began to speak. He recounted everything, the letters to Deborah, the promises he failed to keep, the hidden past he had buried. Every word, every detail, came out of him like a confession he had long avoided. The room went silent. Some of the board members shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in, eyes wide. There was no anger yet, only the weight of revelation, the kind that forces people to reconsider what they thought they knew. Keisha watched from the doorway, her jaw tight. Samuel stood beside her, expression unreadable. Outside, cars slowed as neighbors caught glimpses, whispers spreading. And then, a sound that made Elijah's stomach drop, a camera shutter, a recording. The story was already leaving the room, going into the hands of the world. The board chair finally spoke. "Pastor Moore, this is serious. There are consequences for what you've hidden, but the honesty you've shown today will also be considered." Elijah nodded. "I accept whatever comes. I cannot undo the past, but I will not hide from it any longer." Outside, the wind picked up. News had begun to spread. The neighborhood murmured with curiosity and speculation. But inside, Keisha finally stepped forward. "This is what my mother wanted," she said quietly. "Not revenge, not punishment, but the truth." Ruth looked at her, finally understanding. "You're not here to destroy us. You're here to protect what should never have been buried." Keisha nodded, and to make sure her story is heard. The envelope had done its work. Secrets had been exposed, lies had been confronted, and the Moore family, though shaken, had begun to understand that truth, however painful, could also heal. Samuel placed a hand on Keisha's shoulder. "It's done," he said simply. Keisha looked around the room one last time, her eyes lingering on Elijah. "Make sure it never happens again," she said softly. Elijah exhaled deeply, the weight of years beginning to lift. "I will," he promised. And as Keisha walked away, the sun breaking through the clouds outside seemed to cast a new light over the house. The family had faced their reckoning, and though the path ahead would be difficult, The shadows that had haunted them for decades had finally been confronted. The Moore family, forever changed, stepped forward into a future built not on secrets, but on truth, accountability, and the courage to face what was long hidden. And somewhere in the quiet, the memory of Deborah Lawson seemed to smile, finally at peace. Before we end this story, viewers, remember to like this video, share it with someone who enjoys suspenseful and emotional tales, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories. Comment below. What would you have done if you were in Elijah's shoes? Could you face decades of secrets, or would you run? The story may be over, but the lessons of truth, courage, and accountability stay with us long after the final page. If you want, I can now create a full YouTube-friendly script version combining all chapters with engagement cues, timing, and packing suggestions for voiceover, ready for recording. Do you want me to do that?